All right. Before we jump in as well, I would like to offer some trigger warnings as well. We'll be having some conversation about violence. There might be some instances or stories shared about hate crimes, and I will get us started off by talking about a recent assault. So all of those pre-scripted conversations will be over in the next 5 minutes. Feel free to jump off and jump back on if you would like to avoid some of those. But I would also remind you that this is a live session, so these topics may come up by the panelists, by attendees to their questions at any point over the next hour and a half. I would also like to take a moment right now for a moment of silence for Holden White and the Lsue family and the tragedy of that attack. If you have not read up on it, if you can stomach it, please do. There's also an opportunity to donate to Holden White's recovery. One of our hosts will share that link for the group me in the chat in just a moment. We are close to $100,000, which I believe is the goal for that family. So it'd be really awesome if by the end of this panel we can help meet that goal if you haven't donated already. So join me in taking a moment of silence for Holden and as we wish for his speedy recovery and for the family. All right, thank you. Next, I'll talk about some campus resources that are available very briefly. We have the LGBTQ project, which is housed in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. We have the Office of Diversity, and we have a representative of the Office of Diversity and several representatives on this panel, as well as Dr. Avaris, our Chief Diversity Officer, who will offer some greetings in just a moment. We have the Student Health Center, which is a part of this panel and is working in the background, and more on that in just a moment. We have the LGBTQ Faculty Staff Caucus, which is also represented here today. We have LSU Cares, which has a representative as a host, and we have several others, including student organizations, represented on this panel today. You'll get to hear more about those resources as we continue. Resources will be posted in the chat room throughout this panel, so every few minutes or so, you'll see some resources populating up in the chat room. Feel free to follow those links or to look them up during or after this panel. We do have mental health counselors on standby during this panel. There'll be a link and a phone number in the chat room in case you'd like to talk with somebody. We have a couple on standby at this moment. You can call the phone number that's listed in the chat room, or you can call anytime after this panel or during the week if you need any assistance. And that goes for any campus. So if you are LSUE, if you're joining us from LSUE, those counselors are still available for you today. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Avaris to give us some greetings before we jump into introducing the panelists.
Thank you, Wes, and I certainly sincerely thank Wes for joining us. As he's making special accommodations. Thanks, for joining. I think this is an important conversation, and I thank the rest of you for joining us as well. This is indeed a new experience for all of us as we live in this and work in this virtual environment. But it's given us an opportunity to gather like this in unprecedented speed and accuracy that gives us a chance to share. And so I want to thank all of you for joining. I thank those who work behind the scenes to put this together. And certainly on behalf of both our president and our provost who are on this call, but not part of the panel, I give you sincere commitment to assisting all members of our community, especially our LGBTQ plus communities, in being effective and complete citizens here at LSU. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. I know we've got some folks on the call from LSU Unis, and Wes mentioned Holden White and the atrocity there. But last report I saw was that he is recovering. It's going to be a long journey. And I also saw that the FBI is involved, and so hopefully more serious charges could be brought to the perpetrator. But this is not unique to Unis. This is something that's going on around the country. We've seen increases in, I'm sure the conversations will talk about more detail, the increases in hate crimes and murders of members of the LGBTQ community, specifically the trans community, and more specifically the Black trans community. And so we've got issues that we've got to deal with. The irony is that this is coming on the heels of the same kinds of crime and activity perpetrated against Black African Americans and Black people in this country. And yet, from it and through it, we're coming out with change. And so I'm hoping that if we can get the light shine on these kinds of atrocities and these kinds of horrendous acts, we'll make progress. And I hope that this conversation will be a small part of that. I also know that when we look back on this time in history, what will they say about us? Did we sit silently by, or did we engage? And I can assure you that I know enough folks already on the call that they won't be able to say we were silent, and they certainly won't be able to say that we didn't engage. So continue to do the good work. I commend each and every one of you. It was but a few short, maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, that we started work on realizing the LGBTQ plus caucus, faculty staff caucus. We've got student organizations that are getting increasingly more involved. They have a seat at the table. We'll have a huge summit on Wednesday to talk about the community and making sure LSU is representing all. There's change coming, and in the midst of the darkness, there's a change. And so keep plugging, folks, and keep working. And you have my commitment as well as that of the provost and the president. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I do want to get a chance to introduce all of our panelists. To make it go a little bit easier, I'll call you by the first name that I have for you, and then you can give a brief introduction and state your pronouns, your role on campus, and anything else you'd like to say within about 30 seconds or so to get you introduced to the attendees today. Let's start off with Bill.
Everyone, I'm Bill Mattera, he, him pronouns. I serve as my day job as the Director of Residential Life and Education here on campus, and I'm here today as a representative as the President of the LGBTQ plus Faculty Staff Caucus.
Thank you. Let's move on to Catherine.
Hi, I'm Kathy Saichuk with the LSU Student Health Center, work in the Office of Wellness and Health Promotion. I am a member of the Student Health Center LGBTQ committee, as well as a member of the Faculty Staff Caucus.
Thank you. And we have multiple Kathys, Catherines today. So Kat, if you go.
Sure, sorry about that. I'm Jacquet. I use she, her pronouns, and I am faculty in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, as well as the History Department, an affiliate faculty with AAAS. And I am here to speak from the faculty perspective. I'm also a member of the LGBTQ Faculty Staff Caucus.
Thank you. Savannah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Savannah Maddox, she, her pronouns. I am an incoming PhD student for the Department of Sociology, and I'm also serving this year as the LGBTQ plus project graduate assistant.
All right, and we give a special thank you to Savannah, who is not even on the payroll yet, but is already representing our office in fantastic ways. So we appreciate you so much.
Thank you, guys.
And next we have Chris Bradford.
Hi, my name is Chris Bradford. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the chairman and president of Baton Rouge Pride. Our organization is moving on from just Pride Fest to multiple other resources throughout the year and online. So we will be doing some virtual events soon.
Thank you so much. And Kelvin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelvin Dandridge, pronouns he, him. I work I'm the Events and Communications Coordinator for Open Healthcare Clinic. My previous role was the Prep and PEP Navigator for Open Healthcare Clinic. We work closely with LSU, we work closely with Pride, hey Chris, and hopefully we'll work closely with all of you.
Wonderful. So everyone that you just heard from are serving as resource panelists today. That means that they are part of our LSU or broader community, and they'll be representing different elements of support that students might be working with while they're attending LSU. And then the next set of panelists will be our student panelists, and we'll kick things off with Lee.
Hi everyone, my name is Lee. I use they, them pronouns. I am the current Spectrum president. Spectrum is the largest LGBTQ organization on LSU's campus. I'm a recent graduate from LSU with a degree in sociology.
All right, and will be joining us again in grad school, so congratulations. And next we'll move to Chris. Is Chris on here? I saw Chris was originally part of the call, but I think got dropped out for some reason.
I think Zoom kicked him out and he's trying to get back in right now.
Okay, so we're working to get Chris back with us, and hopefully we'll be able to do introductions for Chris when he gets there. Kyron.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kanik Kyron Joseph Lewis III. Kyron Lewis. I use he, him pronouns. I am a member of Chroma. I do work with NAACP, just kind of all over the Black community with campus. I also do work for the Manship School. But yes, I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Blank. I'm the Spectrum Panels Coordinator, she, her pronouns, and I'm a psychology major, junior.
Welcome. Sydney.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sydney Epps. I use she, they pronouns. I am a recent graduate of the doctoral program in higher education administration at the School of Education. I did my dissertation on the experiences of trans students who are part of Greek letter organizations. I work as a graduate admissions GA for the School of Education's Graduate Admissions Department, and I'm an instructor in AAAS sometimes, but mostly the School of Education's College Success Program.
All right, thank you. And last but not least, we have Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay Dornier. I'm going to be a junior in the fall. My major is French, and I'm a member of Young Democratic Socialists of America and College Democrats at LSU.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. And again, I hope that our other student panelist, Chris, is able to join us soon. I do want to get us going with some questions here. I will let you know that the questions were scripted by students. So I think that some of these questions are going to speak to a lot of the support that they're looking for, but we're definitely interested in hearing what all panelists have to say. Let's go ahead and start with the first one. What can we do to ensure a positive on-campus living experience for LGBTQ+ students? And then jump in whoever has something to say.
I guess I'll just start. When I was looking at this question, the first thing I thought about was making sure that the psychology is there. I think we have to ensure that our RAs, they're called, are completely unbiased from any experiences or anything that they've had in life. The same way that we, we're chivalrous and we want to protect the women and children and the old. I think that LGBT students definitely fall into that category.
Thank you.
If I could add a little something here, we talk about inclusion and bringing our students in, but I think we have to also think about the idea that we have to make them matter. We have to make them feel like they belong at LSU and belong in our campus culture, and not just include them in activities or events or talk about those kinds of things. I think the mattering and belonging needs to be a critical part of it as well.
Yes, thank you. And I know that Chris, the student that's trying to get back on the call right now, had a lot to say about this and has experience living in the gender inclusive housing on campus, and was going to speak to that a little bit. But I don't want to speak on his behalf, so maybe Bill can provide some insight into the gender inclusive housing on campus.
Sure. So gender inclusive housing for us has been an initiative we've had for a while in the Pentagon, which is a space where students can self-identify into a stack that is identified for that purpose. There's a couple challenges with that, and one being that it's a need to opt in. There's sort of a student needs to make individual contact with our office, and a lot of our decision making in this process has been related to the idea of two things. One, it's not uncommon that parents fill out housing applications, and so a lot of times parents who maybe are not familiar with the transition the student's going through or isn't accepting of that is misgendering students in the way they fill out those applications. And so our process has really been designed that the student needs to make contact with us in a private one-on-one setting and kind of communicate what they need. There's a couple specific challenges. One, Pentagon itself is not ideal for most students. And two, with the residential college setup, if a student were to only be allowed to live in that gender inclusive opportunity, they wouldn't be able to participate in those res college programs. And so we really moved to the process of working with the student one-on-one to place them in the housing that best fits sort of the desired experience they want to have academically and socially. And so that one-on-one process has allowed us to place students who wanted gender inclusive options outside of the Pentagon. But that brings us to our second problem of the realities of the nature of what the campus climate is for students who may be experiencing the transition from one gender to another or not wanting to live in the binary. They often are around peers who may not be accepting of that, and to make them do the labor of being required to report all the time has also been something we've been reluctant to do. And so keeping the location of the housing to nuance between the student and us and not sort of branding it, we've done as a safety measure for students and not really sort of putting them in a place where other folks might be able to target that housing. I think we've probably reached a point where it's time to start having broader conversations on if that option still works and if that's what students are looking for. And so I think we're open to that conversation, but the context of how and where we've placed gender inclusive housing is kind of been a little bit more also not wanting to close any doors to students in regards to what programs they could or couldn't participate in with the way our residential college model kind of operates.
I think, and to add to Bill's point, I'm thinking about, I think there is a necessity for queer student housing, but also be thinking about what would it mean and what would it look like if the goal was, let's make all housing affirming and supportive of queer students. Like, what would that look like where queer students could live anywhere on campus and have like a totally like amazing experience? So what is the work that needs to be done? Like the work in the residential halls, right? That really tough work and those really tough conversations we need to have with the students who aren't accepting of queer students, right? And really doing that really tough work. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like beyond like programming, right? That people don't have to go to, but really thinking about centering queer students in the larger project of Res Life. Those are just my 2 cents as somebody who's not in Res Life.
I have 2 things to add. So when we talk about inclusion of queer students, we don't recognize how often we play into their marginalization before they even get here. So in terms of the application that they're filling out to come to the institution, what does that application say in terms of sex versus gender? Oftentimes we conflate those 2 terms when they don't mean the same thing. And asking both of those questions so we have a better understanding of what our population looks like. Do we ask what their orientation is on the application or anytime throughout their process so that we can have a better understanding of the size of our population and the ability to get them together outside of the residence hall, creating forums for them to be able to assess the way they're being taught in the classroom, and is there a presence of queer academics within their work, inventors, people who are pertinent to their major. Are they hearing those queer voices through how they're being taught by their professors, and if not, why? Where in our community is it difficult for them to be themselves? My research focuses on those pockets of academia that are not necessarily as tolerant or historically intolerant and violent towards queer bodies. So when we're thinking about sports, particularly when we're looking at an SEC institution, are our queer students safe going to a football game? What are they going to hear while they're there? What can they not wear while they're present there? Same thing goes with Greek life. Are they able to insert that arena on our campus freely, being who they are, affirming their identity, questioning their identity? And there's plenty of other areas as well. Residence Life has probably done one of the better jobs of acknowledging the issues within traditional landscape, but there's plenty of other money generating institutional facets that we haven't addressed.
Yes, thank you all. I appreciate those answers. We'll probably be revisiting several of those ideas throughout, and some of the questions might bring us right back here as well. I do have want to mention a couple of housekeeping things first. At the bottom of each screen, you should see a chat feature and a Q&A feature. The chat feature can be used for agreements, other types of things. If you have questions, however, please put those in the Q&A feature so that we can get to those in the latter half of the panel today. Sometimes they will be answered by one of our hosts in the background, and sometimes panelists can go in. If you find a question in the Q&A that you particularly want to answer, you can claim it and say that you'll be answering it in our live as well. Also in the chat feature, we are putting in resources, phone numbers, email addresses, web links, all those kind of things where you can go and find additional resources and talk with counselors who are live and standing by right now in case anyone wants to chat with anyone. So with that being said, I'd like to take us to our next question. How can administrators, faculty, and staff create LGBTQ+ supportive classroom environments?
I'm happy to start this one because I have a lot to say on that. So I think, whether we're talking about queer students or any other so-called marginalized group, and I say so-called because the whole problem of marginalized, whatever, y'all know what I mean. No, people are marginalized, but okay. But the most important thing when we're thinking about, right, queer people, people of color, students with disabilities, which of course all of those groups are overlapping, I think as an educator is that students need to be seen, right? And so first we're thinking, how can we do that? Well, the most obvious way is that students should see themselves reflected in the curriculum. And it's just so incredibly easy to do, especially in the humanities, which is why it's always astounding that folks don't do this, but this can be done across the disciplines, right? I mean, even in less obvious areas like math or engineering, right? Who are the great queer mathematicians, which I'm assuming are going to be mostly cis white men because they had access, right? Talk about them in the course, right? So really reflecting students and their identities in the curriculum. On the other hand, we want to avoid pitfalls like having gay day, right? Like, okay, we have our US history class and here's the one day we talk about the gays, right? We want to avoid that. We also want to avoid having all queer representation be white, because that's another problem. People start doing this work, they're who they're imagining as the gay are white folks. So we need to avoid that. Course offerings should expand to incorporate LGBTQ experiences and topics. We should have these classes on the books, right? We don't have, for example, in my own department, history, we don't have an LGBTQ history class on the books. Why not? We should have had that decades ago. Specifically in the classroom, and this is something I think it was in the chat, somebody brought this up, is the problem with the rosters and faculty calling out the names on the rosters, which very often are not the names that folks are using. And so something that I've done, which is, this is very useful for faculty who are listening. When you're using the roll call out last names and have your students tell you their first name. And I have found that literally 90% of my students in a given class have a different name that they're using than what's on the roster. So this is good for trans folks, non-binary folks, but also folks like, I'm Catherine and I go as Kat, right? And I'm a cis person. So, this is good for everybody. Faculty should ask students for their pronouns and use them. This is what always blows my mind. And I think I also saw this on the chat about faculty who don't use the pronouns that students ask them to use. Just respect people and who they are, right? It just seems so basic. It's strange to have to say it. But also being intentional about asking folks for their pronouns and asking, what is their first name? That's part of it, because a lot of times this is unintentional. Obviously, misusing pronouns is intentional, but some of the other stuff is unintentional. And the classroom is obviously interconnected to all aspects of the university that are going to impact what happens in the classroom. So we also, as faculty, we need to keep on top of what's going on in the other areas that do relate to the classroom. So thinking about how folks' names are showing up on Moodle, right? Are people able to put their name, regardless of legal name change? Are they able to do that in Moodle? I think they are. I need to double check that. What protocols are in place, if any, that require faculty to use student pronouns and the names that they've asked the faculty to use, their names, right? Are there any protocols? How do we enforce that? How is the administration supporting and meeting the needs of our students? We really need to be on the front lines of all of this. So I'm going to pause now because I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll be happy to pipe back in.
And I'm sorry.
You can go first. You can go ahead and go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to add to what Kat said about the pronouns, that's very important. At Open Health, during the time that I spent in the clinic, our EMR system specifically asks that. And I mean, it is hard to try to get people to, our front desk clerks to try to get people to remember to ask for that. But it's so important because, we have members of every facet that come to our clinic and we want them to feel included. So I just wanted to add, that's something that we definitely do. And I think that that's very important.
And I was going to say that I do agree with the overarching point of representation. I like seeing my professors and instructors just open that area and space to me. A little bit about me, I'm a mass communication student, so I like seeing, other queer mass communication professionals, just the overarching representation. I want to see that in all aspects of my campus. It allows me to feel a greater sense of connection. So I think it'll be the same thing for other queer students as well.
And, go ahead, Angela.
I'll also add that just that act of asking for pronouns is such an important thing. Because it's such a small act, but it does instantly tell your queer students that you are someone they can trust. You're someone who is not going to instantly hate them for who they are. They can feel much safer and more comfortable in your class just from that small act.
One of the things that I would add, I think, from both a staff and a classroom perspective is, peer interactions can often be some of the most violent and damaging interactions that happen in a classroom. And so I think faculty and staff have to become very comfortable in intervening. And I think, as a student here, I've been in a couple classrooms where I've watched exchanges and where the whole time I'm thinking to myself, this is not okay. What's happening is not okay language. And the faculty have not engaged to say, whoa, there's a difference between opinion and hurt. And so I think whether it is educating yourself enough to engage and to sort of recognize you're the arbiter of control in the room, and that when we go too far, know when it's your responsibility to step in and stop or correct. And you may be a math teacher, but today you're going to spend a couple of minutes teaching about why we don't use language or respect people's pronouns. I think there has to be an institutional commitment to a willingness to intervene in those spaces when it's going left or becoming really harmful that I've not experienced from peer staff, but also faculty who don't identify on the spectrum anywhere.
Also, just to add to Bill's point, I think that also in those instances where harm happens, whether it's, at a campus event or an athletic function or in the classroom or in an office somewhere, restorative justice practices and us kind of dedicating ourselves to how do we address harm after it's occurred and how do we not perpetuate kind of spirals of silence. And I think that would also be something that was mentioned to an earlier point around standard classroom procedures. I think that restorative justice, especially around our community, I think it's something that maybe should have some more verbiage around and maybe a little bit more education around. And I think it could be a really good tool to mend and to start those conversations that are really difficult.
And also to add to Angela's point about the importance of asking for pronouns, kind of goes along with something I've been thinking about too, is, asking for pronouns, what that signals to your students and stating your own pronoun, right? Because most of my students are going to assume I'm a woman, and I do happen to be a woman, identify as a woman, right? They're going to assume that. But if I say, I use she, her pronouns, a lot of students who've never thought about this stuff before might be like, well, why is she even saying that? And that's a great opportunity to have the conversation. And going along with that is in terms of signaling to your students that you've been thinking about these things, that you're recognizing your own positionality, is I think faculty should, we should name our identities to our students. it's obvious I'm white, but if I, it's important for me to name that because it's signaling to my students that I'm recognizing my own relationship to power. So it's not just queer faculty who need to like be out and say, hey, we're queer. And for some faculty, it's not comfortable for them to do that. I am very out. I'm very queer and very out and that has worked well for me. But, I think it's important. It's not just LGBTQ identified faculty who need to name their identity. It's all faculty, right? And something else too, in a really important point, and I can't remember who had mentioned this. I think Kieran, maybe it was you, about hiring queer faculty. This is something else. If we want to make the classroom experience more supportive for our students, like hire queer faculty of color. Let's just start with hiring faculty of color at all, first of all, right? But I mean, like, let's hire the folks who the students can see themselves, right? So the students can see themselves. So anyway, and I also wanted to clarify earlier when I said my beef was saying like so-called marginalized groups, I was thinking more about, I mean, the point there is that people are more than their oppression. And so that's why I kind of like dance around that term while also recognizing, right? Okay, thank you, goodbye.
Just brief addition, a very easy way to show your understanding of the importance of these pronouns is to put them into your email signature. Very simple. And put the little tag of, hey, this is why I'm putting it. I use these pronouns. This is why it's important. I mean, you can find a really general statement online, but just emphasizing that within the emails shows everyone, faculty, staff, students, that we're moving towards that as a institutional identity. And we're going to drag them that way one by one. But I do think that there are instances within the strategic plan that address this. So there is support behind you. We just need to get the ball rolling.
All right, so I think we'll move on to our next question. What resources already exist on campus that LGBTQ plus students may not yet be aware of? So if you can think of any areas, any place that you represent and resources that students may or may not be able to take advantage of or may not be aware of. I'll go ahead and start with one really quickly. I saw in the chat earlier, someone talked about Moodle and the ability to change names. Moodle is actually one of the few places on campus where you can change your name. But I think the concern there, is, however, is that not all faculty pull their rosters from Moodle, because Moodle is not always 100% accurate in terms of reflecting the roster that is put out by the registrar's office. So I've heard the complaint go both ways. Students want faculty to pull rosters from Moodle because that's where their name has been changed. And their names usually cannot be changed with the registrar unless it's been changed legally. But faculty like to pull rosters from the registrar because it's more accurate. So I think all around there's a couple of issues there that we need to resolve as an institution. But yes, you can do a name change in Moodle, and not all students are aware of that. I will add the caveat, however, that every time the registrar updates Moodle, which is semesterly, your name will go back to the name that's on the roster, and you'll have to go in and change it again. So just be aware of that for those students that might be watching.
I would say a space that's been supportive, or that I found support, is the African American Cultural Center. So it's like right a little bit that little way between what Barnes and Noble, and then was a little bit from Barnes and Noble, but basically just finding that support and just seeing other Black students, seeing other queer Black students, that has just comforted me. So the AACC, right around the east side of campus.
So the students can opt to change their name on their electronic health record at the student health system. We use the system Medicat, and they can go in and make choice of pronouns as well as how they want to be addressed, change the name they want to be addressed, those kinds of things. We're working very hard to try to update and stay on top of these kinds of changes that are necessary in the electronic health record systems that are out there, and to educate our staff and our professional staff and everyone in the health center to recognize that, and to I guess, to learn to be more comfortable in asking the appropriate questions, or, to correcting themselves, or to listening to what the students have to say and how they want to be addressed, and those kinds of things. So that's an ongoing process that we've been much heavier into, if you want to use that terminology, in the past year with our committee, as well as listening to students, meeting with students, and understanding their needs from a health and wellness perspective.
Another resource I'll mention really quickly, because it's relatively new to LSU, it's only been around for about a year and a half or so, is the ability to change your name on your Tiger card. That is something that's relatively new. It started in the fall of 2018. There are some limitations, however, because you're a Tiger card, and this is true for faculty, staff, administrators, anyone, you can get your name changed on your Tiger card. The limitation, however, is because your Tiger card is a voter registered ID in the state of Louisiana, your legal name still has to be on the card somewhere, so they chose to put a very tiny print on the back of the card where hopefully no one is looking. But in order to meet state requirements of a voter registration, we had to keep that on there. But the front of the card, the piece of the card that everyone looks at for identification, can be a chosen name. Other resources that students might not be aware of before we move on to the next question.
I just wanted to add, Wes, that as of today, right now, students can access conversations with counselors at the Student Health Center. They can call the number, and I think it's listed in our resources, but it's 225-578-8774. If it's an urgent or emergency type situation, they can ask to speak to the on-call counselor, and they will be linked to them as quickly as possible. If it's not as urgent, of course, they call that same number. They can schedule a telehealth appointment, because that's the world we live in right now. They are also, in our mental health services, doing some emotional wisdom seminars that are, I believe they're on Tuesdays. You can access that information from the homepage there for the Student Health Center. And they're also taped and recorded. So students want to go back in and look at the information that's there. Those are more educational type sessions and stuff. Some deal with coping issues, stress time management, depending on what that student might be looking for. So we are open and operational, obviously through mostly telehealth conversations, but we are here to serve our students.
All right, and then I'll just quickly mention a few things before we move on to the next question. Then there are several areas on campus where you can actually do a name change. I just got a text message from my friend Jacob in Campus Life. Shout out to Jacob. You can change your name on TigerLink, which will update all of your student organization memberships, and that does not change back with the registrar. You can change your name at the University Recreation Center. So shout out to Lori if Lori is watching. You can do a name change on your Outlook email account. Your email address itself won't change, but what email, the name that populates when you send someone an email or receive an email, that will change. There's several different places. I think one of the issues, however, that we need to look at as an institution as we move forward is that other institutions have already created systems where it's a one-stop shop for name changes. And I've been at institutions where this has been offered. You go in, change it one time, and it's changed across campus. LSU has a very fragmented system where you have to go into individual places like LSU Library, like UREC, like the Student Health Center, and each one has to be changed independently. That is something that I'm committed to working on. I know that we're looking to address new software systems as we move forward, but that is one of the key components of a new system that we need to implement quickly. Because it's exhausting to have these conversations day in and day out about name changes and having the responsibility be on the student to attend 15 different locations about name changes. We did a one-stop shop very quickly. The other resource I'll mention is the LGBTQ resource room located in the Women's Center. Shout out to Summer Stein. It's operated by the LGBTQ Project, but housed in the Women's Center. Lots of books, movies, and fun, comfy couches and beanbag chairs, so check that out sometime. Any other resources really quickly before I move forward? Okay, I'll move to the next question. What resources should be implemented or improved on campus to better support LGBTQ+ students? So we talked about some of the resources that exist, what resources should be implemented. I've seen a couple of comments already in the chat about a resource room, so I'm going to turn it over to the panel about thoughts that you all have, about a resource center, I mean.
Yeah, I also noticed that, Wes. So we absolutely need to have an LGBTQ center on campus. It's absolutely shameful that we don't have one. And we're always told it's money, 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 but it's not. I mean, yes, it's priority, right? It's shameful that we don't have an LGBTQ center on campus. It's shameful that we don't have an African American Studies department that's well funded and they don't have a major on campus, right? That's money, but that's really about priorities and where are we putting our money? So the Queer Center is something that we have been working on with the Office of Diversity these past couple of years and trying to figure out, to actually get that to become a reality. But 100%, we need an LGBTQ center. I think about my own undergraduate experience. We had the Rainbow Center. That place was, and thank God that, the African American Cultural Center is a space where queer students can go. Same with the Women's Center. They have the room. That's amazing. But I think about like my own experience having those spaces on campus and how critically important that was. So Queer Center, Queer Center, Queer Center, all the way.
I'm going to challenge our student panelists to speak up on this issue. This is your time to talk about resources that you would love to see on campus, so I challenge you to speak out.
Something else I saw mentioned in the chat was gender inclusive bathrooms. I know there are a number of them around campus, but I think that a lot of students still don't know that. And even with the number of them around campus, there are definitely still areas where it's hard to find some. I've definitely had times where I would have to wait until I was walking through an area of campus where there was a gender-neutral bathroom to use, because if there were any around, I couldn't find them, even using the lists that are online. So I think that getting more gender-inclusive bathrooms and making them more known would be a big change.
So I'd like to add to that, and this is not the question, what was just said, but why do we need to make this a inconvenience for queer students? Why can someone not go into the bathroom that they feel most comfortable going into? And if that is a gender neutral bathroom, that's fine. But if there is a bathroom close to them and they identify they should be able and comfortable to use that bathroom, and that is on the institution to start having campaigns that discuss minding your business. We do it, we've been using that as a portion of this police brutality section of, people using the police as their own personal security guards. It's the same exact way that gender is policed and performativity is policed. So if I'm going into a bathroom to use it, it's because of my convenience. That should be the convenience for anyone using that bathroom. And we need to dedicate ourselves to having communication throughout the university that presses for that necessity of people minding their business, using the bathroom for what they need to use it for, and then leaving, and not socially policing other people's utilization.
Yeah, 100%. I have heard UREC representatives before explicitly say that students are free to use whatever bathroom they're comfortable with there. And just making that stance explicit goes so far because we don't know. If we haven't heard anything from LSU, we have no way of knowing their stance on it. We have no way of knowing where we'll find support. And so just making that idea very well known is huge.
Yeah, Sydney is right on. We need to change this campus culture and climate, right? So that folks not only can use the bathrooms that they, whichever bathroom they want, but like they don't have to deal with, if there are students who are hostile to them, those students are the ones who are going to have to deal, right, with, they're going to be the ones who are going to, are going to get the backlash, not the student who's using the bathroom, right? Like we need to do some major, major education on this campus, and we have a long way to go. And that needs to be prioritized, right?
And I know Kat knows this, but let's tie this into the overlapping elements of racial discrimination and gender discrimination. There was a time in which we had extra bathrooms because of someone's skin color. And so that needed to change for us to, like, the same conceptualization needs to occur. Why was that ever a thing? Why did we ever dedicate that much time, energy, space into making people feel inferior? We are doing the exact same thing now by saying that we need this extra bathroom. And for some people, that is the most comfortable bathroom, period. And so, not saying that it's not necessary. I'm sure that there are plenty of normative bathrooms everywhere, but there are some people who are just like, yes, this is a bathroom that makes me feel a lot more comfortable. And I've been in those bathrooms in Charlotte and Portland. It definitely has a different vibe, but this is not necessary. This is a part of us saying we're going to put our foot down, and when you go into the bathroom, you're going to do what you need to do, and you're not going to turn into, the gender police. And a lot of that just deals with the humiliation of cis bodies and cis minds that make us think that we have that ability or that right.
I definitely do agree with the instance of the gender inclusive bathrooms. Very much so emphasis on convenience, because when we're going to class and we have that 10 minutes to get from, say, the BEC to Lockett, is serious. Very much so the convenience. Also, a lot of this, I feel like we just need to have that conversation again with mass communication. Communicate that to students. Instructors, communicate that to your students. I mean, we don't know if the space is open. I just saw a comment that someone made about Title IX. I didn't know that. But I feel like it's responsibility of the university to let their students know. I mean, we can say we're here for this and this and this, but we haven't been shown that. Because there's a lot of stuff, again, that students, like myself, as a queer individual, we don't know. So I feel like the responsibility is on the institution, rather. Not say that they haven't done work already, but I mean, there's more to be done. So.
No, you can say it. I will say it for you. Yes, there is so much more work that has to be done. Thank you for what has been done. But yeah, y'all know. Yeah, so much work that needs to be done. It's shameful.
I'll add in here, and this is awkward to be advocating for this, given the position that I am in, but there needs to be a full-time person in my role doing LGBTQ work. And I'll be the first to admit it. In my current position, I oversee Latinx, Asian American, Native American, and LGBTQ student life. And at a lot of institutions our size, those are 4 different jobs. And I love what I do, and I love my students, and I love the student orgs that I serve. But if I'm thinking of 20% of my job goes to each one of those orgs, are we really doing what we can be doing to give students a great experience on campus? And the other thing I'll say is that we need money to be able to do the things that we need to do for students. I mean, it's just really plain and simple. And I'll talk with Lee and the GAs that we've worked with and the other folks in our office. When Spectrum comes to me to host a program, I feel like a fundraising development officer. Where can we get this money? Who can we approach? I'll reach out to Bill. Bill, what is Res Life doing? And how can they support our what we're doing with this program? I'll reach out to UREC. UREC, what money can you provide to this program? And while it's amazing that the community can come together to help sponsor events and programs for queer students, I think that it should be on our office to be able to do some of those things too without fundraising. And again, it's awkward that I have to promote that for myself, but I think that's where we're at. So I appreciate everyone here and the resource that they have talked about. In the spirit of time, I do want to move on with about 10 minutes to get through some of these other pre-scripted questions before we jump into the Q&A. Panelists, if you haven't been to the Q&A yet, definitely look through there, find some questions that you want to answer, because at 1 o'clock or a little bit after, we're going to jump into answering some of those questions that our audience members have submitted for us. So for our next question, I want to give a shout out to Open Healthcare Clinic and Baton Rouge Pride. I have a question specifically for you all. What do community organizations like Baton Rouge Pride and the Open Healthcare Clinic provide in terms of LGBTQ student support?
Well, we're going to be moving into a position to help people, not just through Pride Fest. Like I said, we'll be doing some virtual events, but we're working on doing a couple other events to include more people into the community and throughout the community, including students. In the past, we've worked with Spectrum to do some things. We're part of Rainbow Rush every year that we've been invited to it. And we're looking to expand into having more students volunteer and be part of Pride, because we can't just have older people that do stuff for Pride. It needs to be everyone of all ages, all races, all backgrounds. Don't care who you are. Pride is about being proud of who you are and being able to make a change in the community.
Well, that was great, Chris. And I mean, as a community health center, you know, one of our missions is inclusiveness. So we work with organizations like Pride every year. Also, we are one of the sponsors for Pride. We do Pride sponsored activities in-house. And one of the things that I definitely want to mention is that we have a clinic, the Heart Clinic, that has services like behavioral health. We have hormone replacement therapy. We, as I previously mentioned, I functioned as the PrEP and PEP coordinator, which are medications to prevent from being diagnosed with HIV. All of these services are available. If you have insurance, they're definitely available, but we also have a sliding fee scale. We know that a lot of students are not on their parents' insurance, and we have a lot of international students who also attend LSU, so that's a major reason why we have the sliding fee scale. We have programs that are specifically geared for student finances, as far as like paying for medication and paying for services. And like I said, that's just one of our missions, like being involved in the local community and making sure that we support not only LGBTQ plus rights, but truly the rights of everyone.
And thank you so much. And shout out to you both. The LGBTQ project has worked both with Baton Rouge Pride and the Open Healthcare Clinic and several programs that we definitely want to invite you back to be involved in all of our future programs as well. Next question, what LGBTQ plus specific services are offered on campus through the Student Health Center? And with this, I'll shoot it over to Kathy.
Sorry, I had a little trouble there with my mute there. As I mentioned earlier, we do have telehealth going on right now. The number 225-578-8774 is a number that you can call. And then if it's an emergency situation or you need to speak to a counselor right away, that you will be connected with the counselors on call. If you want to just schedule an appointment via telehealth right now, you can do that, whether that would be medical clinics, wellness, health promotion, mental health. Mental health is also doing the emotional wisdom seminars, but they are done obviously online now, and they're recorded. And there's a lot of videos and stuff that will be on the Student Health Center video setup. Excuse me. Also wanted to interject that the mental health department is doing a special webinar for LSU students, LSU unit students, and that is going to be Thursday at 1 p.m. So we have reached out to collaborate to try to help their students as well at this point in time. We also will have the Let's Chat program that will continue. Our mental health counselors would go out on the campus, and a student can come up and chat with them. The name doesn't have to be given. It's about a 15-minute session. At that point, what the counselor is going to try to do is figure out where their student needs to go. Do they need long-term counseling, maybe short-term? Can the health center help them out? Because our system is designed and set up for shorter term counseling, but we do have a case manager on staff. If a student wants to reach out to someone in the community, we will meet with that student. We will help that student navigate whether they have insurance, don't have insurance, or they need financial support, any of those things that they might need at this point, and how we can serve to help them as well. So those are all some things that we are doing right now that are available to students. Obviously, and I think that's listed all on the as a resource page, the Trevor Project, reaching out to national resources and other resources, as well as community resources that are available to students out there. And I do want to also say that if there are things that the health center can do better, that's what we're working towards, and that we want to do better, and that's why we formed our LGBTQ plus committee to try to do the best that we can do for our students and provide those services to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I want to jump into this last question here before we get into Q&A. And I think this one's particularly helpful, so I would love to hear from everyone on a couple of things. The last question, what are everyday, simple things that we can do to create LGBTQ plus supportive spaces? And think broadly, campus, community, etc. And again, as many of you that can speak to this, the better. So simple, everyday things, changes that we can make in our life, changes we can do in our vocabulary, whatever, that can create supportive spaces.
Hello. I just want to speak on behalf of the Greek community, and I'm not saying at LSU, but across the board. I am the advisor of the Gamma Pi chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, which is a national Pan-Hellenic Council organization. Showing up, Greek life, we do not do that. Across the board, those who are committed and have made lifetime commitments to servicing their community, to addressing the issues of the time, to highlighting current events and concerns, we have failed continuously to simply show up. And it's not at marches, you know, when a trans sister is murdered. I'm not even talking about on that level. I'm saying we're not showing up to LSU-sponsored community events that have any inkling of a rainbow anywhere around. And I believe last year was the first year that Sigma Gamma Rho had a table at the Rainbow Block Party. I forget the exact name was, but we were the only Greek letter organization in I don't know all of them, but the only MPHC organization, fraternities or sororities, to show up. And that is extremely disappointing for a community that continuously suffers with accepting the queerness of their community and their queer histories. I did several papers that I discussed focused on Marsha P. Johnson, and we talk about a queer movement. Well, you can't get any more queer and maverick and necessary than Marsha, and we do not discuss Marsha at all. We don't discuss several of our own queer members that were building blocks of the civil rights movement. So I have continuously questioned it. Of course, I dedicated my dissertation to this research as well, but we need to start showing up because we are losing people left and right, and those lives matter as well.
I think a big part of this is, and Wes and I have talked about this quite a bit, but the caucus has also talked about it, is we don't create spaces for LGBTQ students and staff and faculty to gather and be together, right? There's, and no fault of Wes's, like he said, he's got 6 people's jobs. You know, it's really hard to plan those spaces that students don't have to plan for themselves. And financing that and building a space where an LGBTQ student can just show up. They don't have to worry about ordering the food and getting the performers or whatever it is. Those spaces don't exist. And that's a big disadvantage of not having a center where a student can just pop by and connect with other people. You know, it's really hard. Part of many of our identities are invisible. There's no space for us to go and find others who share those identities. And it has not felt like a priority. Programmatically, from many offices, it is often sort of a tacked on extra panelist that can serve in there. It's like, oh, shoot, we need one more person who identifies this group. You know, Wes can't be doing all the intentional work of the institution, down to even when you talk about lavender graduation, there's not often the support and showing up from senior administrators and deans and folks to recognize that space is important as they do in other spaces, right? Whether that's performative or not is a question for the ages, but the reality is that there is not an investment at the same level in there being a space for our identities that there are other individuals.
I would add, and I'm not critiquing the question, but this idea of like everyday simple things, I'm just going to push back a little bit and be like, there's nothing simple about it. And that like what people need to do is do the work. And that's not simple. That is hard. That is hard work that people need to do. We need to educate ourselves. That is really hard work. We need to rethink about the way we think about the world, how we frame the world, the lenses that we're using. So my simple thing is to like do that really hard work, educate yourself, and really just like do better, right? We can all do better. I am like as gay as the day is long, and I can do better, right? In terms of queer stuff. So I think it's really making a commitment to that hard work, and re-educating ourselves in a world, right? I mean, we've all grown up in a heteronormative, heterosupremacist, however you want to imagine society, and we have to unlearn all of that. And that takes a lot of time, but starting to do that work and then implementing that in our day-to-day interactions, that's what makes the change.
Going off of what Kat just said, doing the work, it's not even just for like, I would say just like the general public, like do the work for the general public, be considerate of the human beings around you. But a way to start small is to start in your own family and in your own friend group. It's normalizing asking for people's pronouns. It's normalizing talking about gay and trans issues with your friends and with your family members. Putting in the work as well, like being aware of all the atrocities that the gay community faces on a seemingly daily basis. It's just bringing that into the forefront of like your conversations with the people that you speak to is so important, and it shows your support in such a simple way that I think that everybody should start to really kind of implement that in their everyday lives.
I just saw the clock check. Oh, somebody about to speak.
I just had a small thing to say, but you go first.
You sure? Are you sure? Because I don't want to step on your toes or anything. Are you
Okay,
sure?
I'm just going to say this really quick. I guess one thing that I think is important is that we are mindful of the language that people use to describe themselves. Because I think when we talk about stuff as like the LGBTQ community or the queer community kind of as an umbrella, we can kind of lose sight of individual people's like, own personal identities and stuff. So we should still be mindful that some people don't want to be called queer and some people don't want to use certain language and stuff. So that's it.
Along with that mindfulness and the starting small that was previously mentioned, people being aware of their power, people being aware of the power that they hold with their race, as long as their gender identity, just being aware of the power and the space you occupy. Because some people don't, of course, it's obvious that some people don't have that same power. So you or someone else could be at a better disadvantage or an advantage. So just being aware along with mindfulness and present.
And I mean, I think that, something else that we also have to add is that, we aren't necessarily in the most ideal place to be bringing these issues up. We are below the Mason-Dixon line, and we all know how that is. So there's an even bigger problem on top of this. We truly have to change the way that people think about queer, or queer, gay, however you want to identify yourself, because currently that is equivalent to bad. And that's not true. And so it's hard, and, as you said, but asking for pronouns, challenging our family members and our friends, those are the ways to get it, and we got a lot of work, but definitely I think with consistency, going back to, the education, making sure that we put people in office and in staff and in power who don't have any biases, who look at people just as people. aside from color, size, shape, orientation, and just want to protect those rights that we all have as human beings.
Any other thoughts on that one before we move on? I know it's a really important question. All right, I'll speak really quickly, and then we'll open up to the Q&A. So as I'm wrapping up this segment, if panelists want to take a look in Q&A and find some questions that they want to answer, that would be really helpful. I'll speak really quickly to the importance of queer spaces, as we mentioned earlier, LGBTQ centers. Oftentimes we want to think of our entire campus as a safe space. We want to think of our entire campus as queer-friendly spaces. And while I think that is an awesome ideal, when we come back to reality, we realize that students really do need spaces of their own, as Bill said, to feel safe. And one of the benefits of having centers on campus is this idea of what's called passive programming. When you have centers, you can put things out for students that they can come and receive those things as they're needed. It doesn't have to be planned programs. When we do diversity work the way that we currently do them in terms of LGBTQ, Latinx, Asian American, Native American types programs, every single thing that we do is planned. We can't, because we don't have spaces for these students to go to, right? That's why the AACC is so impactful to students. There's not a student that I've seen over the panels over the last several weeks that hasn't talked about how amazing the AACC is. That's the same feeling that we need to be providing for all of our students in one way or another. And that largely comes back to having the space that feels comfortable, having the space to offer passive programming, having those walls that students can come in and relax and feel accepted and valued and celebrated for who they are. That's what a center does. So yes, all of campus needs to be safe and welcoming and supportive, but those centers, those unique spaces are vitally important. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to panelists who have identified questions in the Q&A that they would like to answer. Does anyone have anything off the top that they would like to get started with?
Right
Savannah.
here. Okay. Something that really stuck out, and we spoke about it a little bit, Wes and I previously, it was around, okay, let's see, I'm looking for the name. Kiemi Brown Rivers, please correct me if I'm not saying that correctly. Specifically around, oh wait, hold on a second. It was around intersectionality and Pan-African identity. Yes, okay. There are spaces for Black students. There are spaces in the OMA as well. However, for me as a Black queer person, how do we acknowledge this intersection? This is something I've thought a lot about. For example, intersectionality is like my favorite thing in the whole world. How are folks in LGBTQ student orgs showing up in the spaces? So even in these spaces where it's, supposed to be empowering and inclusive and like there's a common identity there, how are the other intersecting identities in the room lending themselves to our experiences in trying to build community and have these dialogues and the solidarity, race, age, ability, size, socioeconomic status? How is this shaping the voices that are being heard in the space and subsequently the events and the ideas and the experiences? So for example, like folks who are like very much kind of turfy, like trans exclusionary radical feminism, which spoiler definitely isn't feminism, but also folks of color being like interrupted literally or talked over at pride related meetings, the appropriation of Blackness in certain parts of white queerness that goes unaddressed. And then as an I statement, as a very proudly queer Pan-African woman, there is such an erasure of Pan-African queer folks, and you can see it across social movements. We're seeing it in real time right now with BLM. Where are same gender loving Pan-African folks in student organizations, especially in the executive teams? So that's something that I think is really, really important to kind of take a look at, is how are microaggressions happening in these spaces? How are dialogues happening within pride clubs? Are there niches that kind of form like of solidarity within pride organizations? Like I know at least for me in my previous experiences, I would sometimes link up with other Pan-African folks in pride clubs and we would all just kind of like, not even consciously like gravitate toward each other because it felt a bit more safe in those spaces within the safe space. And then how can I implement these realities, and how can we collaborate more actively with AAAS student orgs, and how can I do that effectively as the LGBTQ project GA? And how can I do this well as someone who's personally invested and impacted in it? I personally am really, really interested and excited to partner up directly with Wes and Doc and Michelle Carter to see how we can really zoom in to what the intersections of Blackness and queerness are, especially given the social and political climate that's unfolding in real time. But I resonate with everything you said in the Q&A.
Just going to add on to that, Savannah, it's like totally right on that our feminist spaces need to be Black feminist spaces,
Very
right? They need to be
much so.
explicitly anti-racist. Our anti-racist spaces need to be explicitly, what's the word, anti-homophobic, or right? I mean, like that we
Right.
need to recognize all these intersections, and if we're going to make those spaces supportive of all folks, then we need to do that work to make sure those spaces are exactly what they need to be, right? Because otherwise we too easily fall into like, oh, the gay space is all white, the Black space is all straight, right? I mean, I'm thinking about Barbara Smith, and all the women were white and all the men were Black, or all the Blacks were men, right? To use her the title from her early 1980s anthology, but right, and so we need to really pull apart those narrowly defined identities and do the work of recognizing, like, no, actually there's, right, all of us are all here. So yeah.
So I'd like to address two questions that I received. One was focused on naming, and the other one was focused on Greek life. In terms of how we interweave queerness into the university, we saw that Troy Middleton's name was taken off of the library recently, and I'm sure that other names will follow if we are now in this tradition of really reading the histories of those names that mark our campus, and not only our campus, but there's a number of names that are stamped across America because of the so-called philanthropic nature of some gentlemen that have very troubled histories as well. One name that I would put forth personally is the name Reed Erickson. We don't have any campus buildings that are dedicated to queer folk, and Reed Erickson was a substantial philanthropist, researcher, when still identifying as a woman, was the first woman graduate of LSU School of Engineering. Personally, I have ties to his legacy in terms of his work in Philadelphia. I'm a native of Philadelphia, and he did a lot of organizational work towards the scientific advancement of the study of trans folk. During his life, gave tons and tons of money, transitioned after his father passed away. Just a really rich legacy of progression is already here on our campus, and we fail to acknowledge that. And I would love to see in the future a building that's named after Reed Erickson. Secondly, in terms of LGBTQ folk in Greek life, it is our setback that we come from a community that has been mightily aggressive towards the visualization of LGBTQ identities in their work. Behind Martin Luther King was a queer man who wrote the groundwork for the March on Washington, and we don't talk about him, and he's a Q. So, I mean, there's so many other ways that queerness is interweaved into our organizations, but we have to talk about how religion is also the foundation of these organizations. When we're talking about HBCUs, they are funded by the church. They are kept alive by church funds. And so we're always going to deal with anti-queerness, anti-LGBT-ness within these organizations, but it really starts with us who are queer people saying to our brothers and our sisters, I need you to stand for me because I'm not going anywhere and I'm not going to be quiet. That means that we are continuously pressing for executive board positions, that we are pressing to have more events where we're represented. I think it was last year or 2 years ago where I had put out a notice to say, hey, like Transgender Day of Remembrance is coming up. I'd love for us to show up. And I was the only person there. So we need to talk a lot about our focus of doing for the whole community and making sure that we're not cutting people out of our own histories, out of our own accomplishments, and realizing that we've progressed in so many other ways. There's so many European American members of our organizations, MPHC organizations. There's so many Muslim and Jewish members and international students who are part of our organizations. It is necessary for us to move forth and include more secular ways of thinking about inclusion. And BLM has really just been the footprint of eschewing some of those issues, being that it was so founded in queer representation. The same way that we moved away from that Christian centering that kind of was a flaw during the civil rights movement, that allowed for the silence of Bayard Rustin to continue. We have to do the same thing now, and kind of sliding in there and saying, look, and I did this presentation before, but all lives can matter until Black queer lives matter, until Black trans lives matter, until the names of, say for instance, Rain Valentine was just attacked in New York City a couple weeks ago. A brother, trans brother, essential worker, at a hospital working. He's also a veteran, and he was attacked by NYPD. And that's not a name that we're hearing. It's one of the only queer names that I can call to mind immediately in terms of the last few weeks, but we're not hearing that name. I believe it was, we had a fellow who was killed down in Florida who was a trans brother by police, and we're not hearing that name. So we need to continue to accentuate the names that we know, but we also need to search through a lot of this minutia and elevate those names.
So just a timekeeping thing, we have about 5 minutes or so before we need to do closing remarks. One of the questions that did come up that I feel comfortable answering is about safe space. So unfortunately, when campus closed down, we had to cancel all the remaining safe space trainings that were scheduled for the spring semester. For those of you who don't know what safe space is, it's an LGBTQ allyship training. It's about 4 hours long. It gets you certified and gets a little shiny rainbow sticker that you get to put somewhere on your door or laptop, wherever. So we are hoping to bring that back in the fall semester. Of course, we're not really sure exactly what fall semester is going to look like at this point. But regardless, even if we are not back on campus, we're hoping to do something with those trainings virtually. So it's a huge part of my job. I love doing safe space training, so I'm going to make it work. But new dates and things will be out soon once we get a better idea of what fall is going to look like.
Well, so I saw a question about reporting incidents that may come up for students, so let's hop in there a little bit. One of the things that's really important, I think, if you think about faculty and staff around campus, if you report bias-related incidents to them, they do have a requirement to report that, particularly if it's gender or sex-based. They have to report that under the Title IX guidelines. And so know that if you report to a faculty and staff member, that they are required to do something with it. If you feel like that's not a way for you to report, you don't feel like you've got supportive folks you can report to, if you go to the Student Advocacy Accountability website, there's a bias-related discrimination section where you can submit a report directly to those who review the process. And so you don't need, there's not a gatekeeper to whether or not your report can make it to that team. You can go directly there and report it, and it'll make its way into the system. And those that serve on the team get that information and can review it absent of the individual you might want to be reporting about. In regards to elements of free speech, there are certainly limits to what the institution can do, but minimally, the labor of having an educational conversation with a student who makes problematic remarks can fall on somebody else and not on you. And so all those reports are followed up on, conversations are had with students who are reported that may not result in a removal from the institution and those kind of things. Our process is educational in nature, but it does mean that somebody else will do the labor of having that conversation and addressing why the conversation is problematic. And so using that system can get you around sort of some of the barriers that you may have felt in the past, because that report heads directly to that group.
I was asked to address the question about group work. Somebody asked about group work. Personally, as a faculty member, I wouldn't say I never assign group work, but moving forward, I am never assigning group work ever again, because as some of you maybe have seen that meme going around, group work always fails because it's always one student who ends up doing all the work. I don't know if you guys have seen that meme about wearing masks in public, but anyway, that's a separate issue. So I think, when I'm thinking about the assignments I'm going to be creating and the different kinds of assessments, I always want to center my most marginalized students, again, to use that term. And that was something that really became very clear for me, particularly when we moved online in the spring, and thinking about, okay, how am I going to make this test so that students don't cheat? Instead of being like, okay, how am I going to make this test so that my students who are registered with Office of Disability Services can achieve and succeed, right? When we recenter who is it that we are trying to support? It's all of our students ultimately. And so the same thing with group work, I just find that so often doesn't work for students on so many different levels. And as somebody had said in the Q&A, they just feel it feels outright dangerous for them to work in groups. So, we need to ask ourselves these questions of, okay, how is this going to support or negatively impact a student? And then move forward that way. And so I would like to see an end to group work, unless people choose the person they want to work with and they know they can work well together. But just for so many reasons, group work just seems to be really not useful, and ultimately you don't get from the students what you're looking for. So anyway, those are my 2 cents on that. Thinking about recentering again, our different student populations, and thinking about what's actually going to serve all students really well. So if I give more time on this exam, that's going to help everybody, not just my students who are registered with ODS. And yeah, maybe there'll be 1 or 2 who cheat, but you know what? I can't worry about them. I need to focus on supporting the students who need the support. So that's my thing with group work too. I'm like done with it.
So there was one question that talked about education or having a class maybe at certain levels so that people have a better understanding. We're dealing with a lot of isms and phobias and stuff that we've been talking about, and certainly so many things have come to light recently. If we would consider maybe we have to start with our incoming students and provide them maybe a new philosophy, a new attitude, and that possibly could be done through some type of required freshman course, where a lot of the things we are all talking about on this today, as well as last week in the discussions for racial issues and bias there, a lot of these prejudices and things could be possibly addressed with our incoming students, because I think it was Kat that mentioned it earlier about we have to change the way a lot of our students have been taught or brought up. I'm going to guess that I'm probably one of the oldest people on this panel, and I can tell you for sure, living in the 50s and 60s, I'm aging myself there, but anyway, living during that time, and when I look back at things I saw and were talked about, and then where I am now, and even having to go through the process of coming out during an era where I risk my family ostracizing me and never speaking to me again. And I know that's still something that happens now, but to have seen some of the changes that have occurred is important. But I think we have to reach our students where they learn, and if that means establishing a class where every student that comes to LSU has that class and can be taught, what does it mean to be prejudiced? What does it mean to be racist? And what does it mean to be anti-racist or anti-prejudice? To understand the changes that can be made, because I have a lot of faith in our younger generation, as has been seen in so much that's happening right now. They want to change. They want to be the change agents. Maybe we need to do a better job of helping them and giving them the tools to be those change agents and to do it in a safe way. And I do want to give a plug for our bystander intervention program, because our folks are revamping that to include interventions in a safe way that you can do it for all types of racism or prejudices that are out there. Not just, it stems from the sexual assault issues, but it has certainly expanded on how we can do that safely. And that's what we're talking about, Bill, when you answer that question about, reporting and how do we do this. If we can educate more of our students with the bystander intervention program, and that could be included as part of the curriculum in that class. It's teaching them about life and not just history or science or math or those kinds of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I think you wrapped up a lot of the sentiments that we've talked about today quite nicely. As I come in to offer closing remarks, I would like for all the folks that have been working in the background to go ahead and turn your videos on if you're comfortable with it. I want to show everyone that's still with us at home that this does not happen overnight, that this is something that our team comes together to help with. So I appreciate all of you, whether you are panelists, whether you're in the background, the host, the Q&A, none of this works on its own, and it truly is a team effort. So I appreciate you all. I do have a couple things I want to remind everyone as we're closing up. Sydney said it, a couple of you have said it. We have to say the names, we have to remember the names. Just in the last couple of weeks alone during Pride Month, we have seen way too many murders and attacks, and it has just been awful. And I have some names here that I just want to read off, and I'm sure there's several others that I don't even have yet or that will never be shared. But Dominique Fells, Rhea Milton, Tony McDade, that was who Sydney was referring to, Malaysia Booker, Selena Reyes Hernandez, several attacks, including Iana Dior, and then our very own LSUE family member, Holden White. These way too many names. This list should be 0. And that's what we're doing here today, is to try and bring awareness to these issues. It's a start. We didn't solve anything here today, but hopefully someone that was viewing this took away something that will help them on their path towards allyship. Take a safe space training, start somewhere, even if you have no idea where to get started. Make mistakes, acknowledge your mistakes, but be an ally along that path. So in any case, thank you again. We appreciate you. The recording of today's panel will be available probably in a week or so on the main LSU YouTube page. If you have any questions or unresolved comments or concerns that were not addressed during the panel today, feel free to reach out to the LGBTQ Project and ask those questions. We'll try and find answers for you. If we don't know them, we'll reach out to some of our campus partners to get answers. You can email us at lgbtqproject@lsu.edu if any of those questions or concerns are still there for you. Again, thank you all to the panelists. Thank you for the hosts that are working in the background. Thank you for everyone who attended today. We truly appreciate you all. Lists of resources both on campus and in the community and nationally, go to the lsu.edu/LGBTQ project. Click on the resources tab. There's lots of stuff there. If there's things that are missing, let us know. And again, thank you for attending. Happy Pride Month, everybody. I appreciate you.